stick around till the end if you want to hear John Allen's hot takes on what are some exciting projects in the space and how to get funded by Decrypt Capital.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, definitely. Always happy to help fund kind of any Cal alum or anybody who's involved. I think I love seeing the kind of community that's growing out of Berkeley. And I think we were talking about this before, kind of like that Stanford versus Berkeley. Like, Stanford has a lot of funding, and it was funny. Like when we first kind of started, blockchain at Berkeley, it was really just organic. Like we just had to kind of like do it ourselves. We didn't have a ton of support from administration. We were kind of ignored, and then at a certain point, they kind of like fought us a little bit because they wanted to own it and kind of incorporate it into the faculty. Whereas Stanford, it was like they got a huge grant. All of a sudden, they had like 6 blockchain courses, and they were like, saying like, "Hey, we're really good at blockchain too," but I think because the community in Berkeley has been so organic and so student run, and just kind of the environment has created such this entrepreneurial spirit, where people just kind of want to build things, want to come together, want to do great stuff. And I think like it's pretty hard to say that, there hasn't been like higher quality projects that have come out of Berkeley. So I love the community that's like continues like every year, and, love seeing kind of like what you guys have been continuing to do with it, and, all of the things that are coming out of Berkeley.
thank you so much. And I also agree with your take on Berkeley versus Stanford, although I won't say much publicly. I want to hop into the history of Bitcoin blockchain. So last Thursday's webinar was about the intro to Bitcoin and the history of Bitcoin and how that has impacted what we see as blockchain technology today. And that was really important to kind of understand the philosophical underpinnings of this technology. And I know we've talked about in the past, like what that means to people. And when I want to go back to the moment when you read that Bitcoin white paper, what was the first thoughts that you had in your head reading that white paper, that foundational paper in this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really this notion of like self-sovereignty. Like it's kind of funny too, because I think that it's not so much if people understand the technology, it's more so if people understand the current kind of status quo of like finance and like how people kind of engage in that, and kind of like money and value and how that affects people, and how if you can participate in the financial world, how different that is. Or the simple act of being able to set up a point of sale is so cumbersome that people can't even start businesses. And so the ability to have this just be this kind of very easy, very accessible thing that's not built to extract money and extract value out of its clients. It's just kind of this open source project for like the good of the people. I just love the narrative behind it, like somebody, some group, whoever named Satoshi kind of just created this, and the code speaks for itself. And so I think for me, that was the most compelling thing. It was almost like, it just had such a cool story behind it. And then I think the other thing behind it was that I've met so many different people who are so passionate about this space, but it's for so many different reasons, like so many people want to really focus on more of like developing countries and kind of like bringing agency to them, or like some people want to have a kind of like, bank the unbanked, or some people want to unbank the banked, right? And so it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. It's like kind of similar, but then you also have people who want to just apply blockchain to a different range of things and kind of bring efficiency to industry. You have people who are just looking at it as kind of like refining what already exists. You have people who want to just kind of change the entire world and change the entire status quo. And so it's like such a wide spectrum. But I just love the passion, and I love that pretty much any facet of the world that you're interested in, I think can almost somehow be connected to blockchain, and you can find a niche to get interested in. So just that breadth is just incredible to me.
Yeah, and something that reminds me of is Brian Armstrong's recent article about the mission of Coinbase. And
Yeah.
it really shows that even in a space like this, there's the full spectrum that you just mentioned. And the collective power of this entire space really is daunting. It's amazing. So you read this white paper, you were inspired. What happened next?
Yeah.
What did you do? Where'd you go?
Yeah, I mean, so I got really into trading Bitcoin, and like there was like just not that many groups. Like back in the day, it was just like you'd hang out like on TradingView and like look at people's charts, and then I met like a couple of people on like Bitcoin, like Reddit Bitcoin markets, which is now like the last couple of years have been awful, but it used to be like a lot of alpha to be found there. But like kind of direct message with some people there. Got invited to there's like a whale called TeamSpeak. And that's where like, I don't know, it's like a lot of the kind of like large traders, like people who might know like Fontes, like he was like a legend for just like shorting all the way from the top, you know, and it's just like kind of like these big guys would just be on there just like chatting, and it was just really interesting. That's kind of where I learned about trading, because it was just something that was just so new to me. And so I learned a lot there. If I just kind of, most of the price action at that time was in China. So I pretty much was just nocturnal. Like I would stay up like all night trading and then kind of like sleep during the day. Because like China pretty much ran the market. And it's weird seeing things now, because back in the day, it was like, it's kind of like a meme now. It was like China bans Bitcoin, but like back then, like that was like something that could probably kill Bitcoin. You know, like there was like a non-zero chance that Bitcoin would go to zero and just completely die if China outright banned it. Whereas now it's, you know, I think we're quite far past that. That's not as much of a concern. It's, you know, still non-zero, but it's very, very small in my opinion. And so I don't know, from that, just like, there were just so many crazy experiences back in the day. Like, I don't know if anyone's ever heard of like Butterfly Labs, but they were like one of the most hated companies in crypto. Like they had these like jalapeno like miners that they were like supposed to make. They were like one of the earlier ASIC miners, and they just kept like delaying the shipping. People found out they were mining them themselves, and then they sent them, and they were like dusty and like used. And then they actually sent people these foam like pitchforks and torches that says like why no ship and like why late. And like they were just like trolling, and like I think like a couple of the 3-letter agencies got involved, and like they got sued. But like it was just so Wild West back then, you know, like it was just like really, really different. I think like another one of the cool ones on like Call TSP, it was cool, was like the whole bear whale incident. Like I don't know how many people know this one.
Before we get into that, why don't you give a quick definition for our audience of what a whale is in crypto trading?
Oh, got it. Yeah, well, I mean, there's probably a couple of various definitions, but I mean, a whale is just someone who has like a lot of capital, and so they can like significantly move markets. And so you can have like just kind of like general whales, or some like Bitcoin whales, or Chainlink whales, or, you know, Ripple whales, you know. So it's anyone who has enough capital that them by themselves can kind of influence the market quite a bit. But yeah. And so, yeah, there was like this bear whale incident where nobody knows who it was, but someone decided to place basically a 30,000 Bitcoin sell order at $300, which basically created this wall. So like if you don't trade, you know, you can kind of see like this buy sell like order book, and you basically had to like, it's usually like, you know, 1 Bitcoin, 2, maybe 10, but it's just 30,000, this massive bar to sell, and the price could not go above $300 until this sell wall was gone. And so like everyone was like doing their part, you know, they're like, oh, I'll buy 10, I'll buy 20 Bitcoin, I'll buy 10, you know, like, cause at that point, you know, you had to like, it was like people rallied against it, and it was this real community effort. And then the bear whale ended up being defeated. People have like a bunch of artwork. Like if you search for it, there's like paintings that people auction on Bitcoin Talk. And then it popped immediately to like $375 after that. So, it was just, yeah, it was just like really, really interesting, which you think about that now, it's like, that was like $9 million, which is nothing now. You look at the volumes and it's absolutely insane, but this was like everyone in the whole community was like, oh my gosh, like what is this? Like we're never going to be able to buy all these Bitcoin, you know? And then I think the last kind of like story that well, I mean, there's a lot more, but like, I don't think a lot of people remember back on Coinbase used to just be Coinbase before they launched like GDAX, and now they have like Coinbase Prime and like a bunch of other kind of like exchange products. But they just had where you could just buy and sell. And then they opened up like instant buying and selling. But then they launched this page that was just a rocket and a moon and a week countdown timer. And then they were just like, that's like, it's going to change everything. And it was like the most like hype thing ever. Like people were like, holy crap, Coinbase is like one of the biggest companies in crypto. We're going to the moon. Like this announcement's gonna be crazy. And so like the price just steadily pump. And then like all of a sudden it changes and it's like, we're proud to announce like our exchange. And it just like dumped the price like 30%. Everybody's like, what the heck? So yeah. Yeah. So like, I don't know, you can't really find too many images of that, but I mean, that was very kind of pump and dumpy. Like that was big news. And then it was like not very interesting news, but
right after.
It was funny.
This space really just doesn't ever cease to amaze with the way things twist and turn.
Yeah.
I feel like that story is analogous to today when we're trading yields on yam and sushis and all other random stuff in DeFi. Um, yeah, I'm not sure if the audience, if hit the chat if you've been yield farming on decentralized finance protocols. I want to hear more about that.
Yep. Hopefully nobody bought into hot dog or any of these rug pull farming coins, but yeah, I think I don't know, the whole notion of farming is just, it's very interesting. I mean, I think like it's kind of funny, like if you look at a lot of the crypto history, and I mean just history in general, right? Like it's not the same, but it does rhyme. And you kind of look like, I think like one of the more interesting ones is like Bancor. The kind of Bancor to sushi swap kind of spectrum is like Bancor was saying like, hey, let's kind of have these AAMMs and like, let's have a token. And people were like, we don't really like a token. It never really took off. They raised like, I think 130 million. So it was like that, like, capital wasn't a problem, but it just didn't take off. And then you had Uniswap and people were saying, hey, like, let's do Bancor without a token. And people were like, wow, like mind blown. Like this is amazing. Like Uniswap's brilliant, right? And then all of a sudden you have SushiSwap come along and say, hey, guess what would be even more cool? If we gave the community a token so that they could be a part of this Uniswap. And so it's like, it's just very roundabout, right? And like, NFTs are kind of coming back and like, it's just, there's a lot of similarities where I think that things were like, the pieces were there. Like if you can look on like 2014, 15, like Bitcoin talk, a lot of these premises of like NFTs or DAOs or like all this stuff or governance were like all there, but the right pieces and the right people weren't in place. And, the space wasn't quite ready for it yet. So it's kind of cool to see, especially like governance for a lot of these things kind of come to the forefront, because I think decentralized governance is one of the more interesting things in crypto. So it's great to see kind of that being pushed and people actually engaging and benefiting from it. So
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think people in the space really, the train is going, and these things are going to keep on coming up. Governance, maybe in 2 years, 1 year, even we'll have sharding working correctly, and maybe that might be wishful thinking, but I'm hopeful. Things are going to keep coming out, and the space is going to dynamically evolve like it always has been.
yep.
But zooming back to 2014, who is someone that has inspired you in this space, and someone who is someone who's inspired you, and especially back then?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, I think like one of the bigger pieces that I like didn't even highlight was like Andreas Antonopoulos. Like the way he talks about crypto, and I mean, I know like it's kind of interesting seeing like people evolve, right? Like all these characters like take on kind of these own things and diverge, and so it's like current Andreas, like he says a lot of things. I still respect him a ton as an individual, but when it came down to like 2014, 2015, I don't think there was a single better advocate for Bitcoin, like exclusively. Like he didn't so much like explain the technology. He like almost like proselytized. Like it was like a religion, like it was just incredible. Like just listening to him speak and how passionate he was about it and how like obsessive it was. Like I just remember his, I forget what his video was, but where he was just like, Bitcoin is like punk rock, and like compared it to that, that it's like, it just doesn't have to play by the rules. Like it's going to change the world. And like, it totally just inspired me. And I think that like that kind of like intensity and that kind of thought is what made me say like, hey, yeah, this is what I want to do 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Like I just want to invest in crypto. I'm not going to like spend money on anything else. Like, I want to like devote my entire life to the club, like do blockchain at Berkeley, like, not do any other extracurriculars or have a life outside of that. And yeah, it's just people like that are infectious. And I think that's really, he's like, it's definitely one of the individuals that did a great job kind of getting this space to where it is.
I agree with that. I've seen some of those videos from back then, and really infectious energy. I sent the name in the chat for anybody who wants to look at or Google that and look at some videos from back 2015, 2014. Really worthwhile just to see what was the energy that John's referring to in the space. So that's a person that inspired you. What about a new project, a new company that you thought was really changed things for you back then?
Yeah, it's funny. Probably Dogecoin. No, I'm just kidding. It's kind of a funny story though. I mean, like we were going through like some of the old coins, and I was like going through and kind of saying like each coin has some kind of unique value prop, you know, and I was just like, what is Dogecoins? You know, like I just don't understand it. And I remember somebody told me like, oh, it's their community. Like their community is what it's all about. And if you look, it was like actually a very rabid community. Like people were like super helpful and sending free Dogecoin. And so yeah, anyway, kind of a brief aside, but I like Dogecoin. I think it's interesting. But I think for me, it's funny because like me and like Max Fang butt heads a ton, like when it came to tech on Bitcoin and Ethereum. Like I was just a total Bitcoin maximalist. I was like, Ethereum's a total shit coin. Like, why are you wasting your time on this? Like, it doesn't matter. Like this whole sound money premise, you know, Lightning Network can like solve all this thing. Like people are talking about like, oh, you can do all of these like tokens and ERC20. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like back in 2014, like Jing from like Stanford, like we met her, like she was working on this kind of colored coin implementation for NASDAQ, you know, and it's like, you can do the same thing, kind of using the, you know, the metadata for these Bitcoin transactions, and like, it's extensible enough and blah, blah, blah. But yeah, it's funny because then I kind of came around, and then I think he went a little bit more Bitcoin maximalist. So we kind of met in the middle, but I think Ethereum has made me kind of think about the space more than anything. And I think even more so than that, it was more like the dynamic between this kind of private permissions versus like public permission lists. Just because so many of these clients that we talked to were like, it got really weird for a while because everyone was saying like, hey, we can't use Ethereum because it's not private, it's not scalable. And so it's like, all right, so we can have this, you know, like Hyperledger that's, you know, we're going to host 3 nodes like in the same office, and then we're all going to agree on some state, and it's going to be private because only we hold the data. And it's like, yeah, why? And so we like, for like months, we like would teach this kind of like blockchain versus database and like make it defensible. And there were like so few use cases that was actually defensible until you start to build out this kind of, what I really related to is more of this kind of like internet versus intranet. Like you used to have these intranets in the library, right? That were like extremely fast, you know, like you could like, you were there in the library, you could get this material, but then you give up that bleeding edge efficiency to get something that's unique. And it's that kind of connectedness, you know, for like the internet is the ability to communicate across and share information and share knowledge. And so that's the same thing with blockchain is you're not looking for bleeding edge efficiency. You want to optimize for trust because that's the primitive that it introduced is trust. And so if you can't optimize for that, everything else is a no-go until you get that base layer set. And then you can start optimizing for efficiency and get other benefits. So I think it was really interesting seeing kind of like the Bitcoin versus Ethereum approach. And then at that time, there was like all of these kind of like delegated proof of stake and like shortcuts to how to get kind of like scalability. And you kind of alluded to a few of it, like some of the sharding stuff that's coming online. And I'm really bullish on like ZK rollups and optimistic rollups as well. So it's kind of cool seeing tech come online that basically gives you those kind of scalability benefits without making any concessions for security or for trust, because I think that is everything about blockchain, and you can't concede anything in that regard.
That's amazing. And you know, John, that internet versus intranet analogy is one of the best ways I've heard it be explained in a long time. So audience members, you really got a treat there. That was good. I'm curious about ZK. This is a bit of a tangent, but about ZK rollups. What are they, and why are you bullish on them?
Yeah, so you can basically think of like using like an Ethereum as an example, is that every time you send a transaction, you're basically sending kind of this to the Ethereum chain one at a time. So you're having this kind of like, you know, S prime kind of movement for each transaction you send. You can kind of like, we'll just be really abstract because it's not to dive into the tech, but how about instead of sending one transaction at a time, then you can only fill a block with so many transactions per second. Why don't you just basically have a bundle of transactions, and then you create a zero knowledge proof, and then you basically submit that proof to the chain. And if you validate that proof, then you know that those transactions are valid, and that bundle of transactions can actually all be validated as like a group. So it's just much more efficient. There's obviously some kind of like data availability issues, and like there's a lot of things that need to be solved for. But it's one of the few ways I've seen that you can actually get the same security assurances as the base layer Ethereum while getting significant scalability. It's really only kind of bounded by the compute needed to generate these proofs. And so, yeah, there's kind of this trade-off, because it's like you can't kind of compute the proof until you have enough transactions. So if you want to have a 10,000 batch, you need 10,000 transactions. And so if you only have 9,000, you might have to wait. And so it's like, it's kind of a trade-off between maybe some user experience. But I think with, people paying like to stake on Sushi Swap, we're paying like $120, like that's insane. If I could pay $1, I would probably wait a couple more minutes. Right. So I think that, combined with some of the like sharding techniques, combined with a few other things, that there's not a single kind of silver bullet to solving these things. But I just think a lot of these efficiencies kind of combining together are definitely going to get us to where we need to be.
That's amazing. And it's just so crazy that in this conversation, we keep on going from Bitcoin, and this all started from one white paper. That really brought together all of these systems, cryptography, and algorithms into one technology. And then it sprouted all of the stuff that we're talking about right now. And that really is amazing. And that's why Bitcoin is for us is so important to the foundation of this technology. So that's awesome. And so let's go to Berkeley days. What's the story behind going to Berkeley in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to go to Berkeley. Like the whole reason I joined the military was so I could get my bachelor's while I was in and then go to Berkeley Law. After the military, I was like, there's zero chance I want to go to law school. That sounds awful. But I still want to go to Berkeley. I don't know. It was just kind of always in my head. And I had a few friends who had went there, and I just wanted to attend. So ended up getting in. And then, yeah, I mean, it was kind of interesting because having not done anything academic for 5 years, and then I got my associates in the military. And then so I started as like an upper division, like a junior at Berkeley. And I hadn't done really any academics for like 5 years. Like I did a few online classes, but like those are a joke. Well, I mean, you guys are all probably taking them right now, but like imagine like not even Berkeley. This is like American Military University. Like I don't even know how they're accredited. Like it was so easy to basically do them. So that was definitely a big shift for me. But I knew I wanted to do something with blockchain. And so like maybe we can kind of like jump into a little bit of like the blockchain at Berkeley kind of like founding thing, because I remember I was like started and it was like stats 21. And so like I walk in, like I wanted to be super early. Like I didn't know about Berkeley time. Like in the military, you're always like 15, 20 minutes early. At Berkeley, you're 10 minutes late. So I was like 30, 40 minutes early, like every class for like the first month. I was like, this school is crazy. Like what? Like, I just could not get used to it, like being like late. But slowly adapted. And then you graduate, and then you have to like definitely adapt back. But anyway, that's a different story. So I was like sitting in the second row, and because the first row was like taken, and no one could have any laptops or anything. But I had this one guy in front of me who was sitting there, and he had his laptop, and he's just like searching this like CoinDesk articles and like reading about Bitcoin. This is about like in like 2016. And I was like, what is going on? I was so distracted. I was like kind of frustrated because I'm like, hey, I'm trying to like pay attention, and like, you're just browsing Bitcoin. So I ended up like, I was going to be late to my next class. So I like went, but then that 2 days later, I had the class again, and I saw the guy standing in the hallway. And I went up to him and I was like, hey, like I saw you were reading like an article a couple of days ago about Bitcoin. Like, are you into crypto? And then he's like, why the hell were you looking at my computer? And so this was how I met Ronan Kirsch. If anybody knows him, he's like a super like serious, like Israeli guy. And then I was like, hey, I've been like involved since 2013. Like I'm super into trading, like just obsessed with the space. And then he was like, oh, like let's get coffee. And then we just started talking. And then I just like sold him the dream. Like he was just convinced. Like he ended up putting all his financial aid in Bitcoin. That year it ended up like 3xing, and then he ended up rolling that into Ethereum, and that went up like 4 or 5x. So it's like, I just like, like you start making money, and then all of a sudden you're very engaged with the space, right? You're like very interested. But he was in this entrepreneurship class with Tobias Dees, who was like one of the other co-founders of BAB. And he wanted to start a blockchain consultancy. And so I remember I was like, I went to the Bitcoin Association, like, and it was just kind of people hanging out and talking, but then they were like, we're going to start this blockchain at Berkeley thing. And then I was like, okay, cool. Like I'll apply to that. And then like Ronan all of a sudden was sending out an invite for an interview to me. And I was like, what is this guy, like their secretary? Like what, you know, is he like brown noting? Like, what is this? Right. And then all of a sudden he's like, no, like I'm like going to be part of the leadership. And then I was like, what the heck? And then he's like, just the next board meeting is tomorrow, like come. And I'm like, I can't just invite myself to like a board meeting. And then he was like, yeah, you can, they need you. And like, so I just showed up, and it was like a lot of these like OGs from like the Bitcoin Association, like great people. And it was like a little bit weird, but then I don't know, it just ended up taking off. And it was like, I think like, it was funny because like Ronan definitely taught me that whole like ask for forgiveness, not permission, you know, like he's very much a guy who's just like, hey, like let's just get it done. Like, you know, it doesn't matter. Like, let's just like do stuff, like move fast, break stuff, like, but let's build something. And so that was kind of like, you know, Tobias, some exchange student from the Netherlands, wanted to start some consultancy, you know, Berkeley, like he had that passion. Like I wanted to do something. Like Ronan was super entrepreneurial. Max had like for sure the technical prowess, you know, was teaching the decal and just like super knowledgeable about it. And yeah, just like a lot of the like early day people, it was great. Yeah.
And that created what we have today.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, yeah, I mean, there's so many people I didn't name, you know, like Andrew too, like Sunny Agarwal, like I'm forgetting so many people, like I'm terrible with names, but I mean, like it was dozens of people who were involved and instrumental. And like, it was just crazy to me that, you know, we'd have a board meeting with like 15 people that would be like an hour and a half long. And we would, you know, would just be talking about like all of these like deep issues and like trying to have these guides and these strategies and like talking about like, hey, like when we graduate, how does this not die? You know, like we need these guides. We need to say like, these are the roles and responsibilities. Like, here's kind of how the department heads work. Like, here's how we incentivize people. Like, here's some of the like kind of material that we can help teach. Like, you know, how do we attribute material people make? And people got weird. Like, oh, I wrote these slides. If somebody else uses them and doesn't, like, I'm going to be forgotten in 5 years, you know? And it was just very, very cool kind of seeing that grow. And I think what's been even more cool is seeing it just continue to thrive, because I think it was a little hard for like all of like me and like a few of the other people to kind of like let go and give that agency, but it's something that's super necessary. Like we can't continue to micromanage and be like, hey, like we want to run this like a startup, like we're going to make money, we're going to do all this consulting, you know, like we want to like do that, you know. It's like each leadership team has a different focus and a different competency, and each iteration you guys have just kind of like taken it to another level. It might be in a different kind of like approach, but the brand is just phenomenal. Like everywhere that I go around the world, like people are just very impressed with blockchain at Berkeley, and it's just maintained that high bar. So it's been great to see.
Thank you, John. And we really looked up to the goals and guidelines that you all have set in its founding, and we've not forgotten that because we've taken different approaches. So it's really, really, really cool to see your legacy live on. I had a question in the chat earlier, which was about the physical crypto and
Nice.
What is blockchain at Berkeley coin?
Ooh, blockchain at Berkeley coin. Well, I mean, if anybody wants to buy one, they're like 2 Bitcoin a piece. No, I'm just kidding. Basically, physical crypto, you can think of it as like a cold wallet, but it's just more shiny. So we basically made it out of like a 1 ounce silver and a Kosh. Yeah, another one of the like OGs who's like super instrumental. You know, designed the logo that's behind you. All the amazing detail. You have to give him a shout out. So he actually designed the coin, and then I had went to Northwest Territorial Mint. They designed the mock-ups like with the dies. They made like, I think we made 200 of them, 1 ounce silver. And then I ended up going on Bitcoin Talk because I knew a lot of the collectible kind of like coin collectors. And I ended up selling the first 20 of them, and I sold them for $250 a piece. So that basically paid for all of the other coins. So we got them for free.
Wow.
And then I also had, basically I know somebody who makes stickers in China, but they're tamper evident stickers, just like on the Cassatius coin. So you stick them onto something, but when you peel them off, it leaves like a honeycomb pattern. So you can't put the sticker back. It like destroys the sticker. So what you can basically do is you have something cool, like it had like blockchain at Berkeley established like 2016, like version 1, and like a cool lattice like kind of design. But then on the back was a blockchain at Berkeley sticker. And then underneath that, you could put a private key that was tamper evident. So So yeah,
That's so cool.
yeah, we did those for 2 years, and then we did 2 years for the SF Blockchain Week, and I think those are the only 4 coins that are kind of out there. Yeah,
Rare items.
definitely, definitely.
That's
Yeah,
so cool.
but if anyone's interested in them, I think I might still have a couple. The first ones we didn't, because we basically use them as incentive. Like, we had groups who would do kind of these small proof of concepts, and then whoever was winning those competitions, we awarded the coins. But I might have a couple of the blockchain week ones. So yeah, I can link up with you guys if you guys wanted to, like, maybe I could ship them to you or distribute them, or yeah, something like that.
Yeah, will do. I will definitely get my hands on one of those silver coins. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
And John, you should know that now we actually have an internal Babcoin cryptocurrency. So it's used to incentivize attendance at meetings, showing up to certain events, socials. We'll probably have some kind of gambling situation going on too. So that exists now. It's an ERC20 token on the testnet. So,
So who's the oracle on distributing these for?
it is me, the one and only centralized president.
Proof of authority. I love it, man.
Proof of authority.
That's cool.
That's so funny.
And
So
you guys,
yeah.
I'm curious, what's the usage for? Is this more of like a status thing, or like at certain levels you can do different things, or like
Yeah, so this is, if anyone is, I don't know if there's any other students on here from other universities, but we've actually created an internal member portal, which kind of serves as a member roster and like a list of projects that people are working on. So it's like a remote work station. So you can log into the member portal, get all the resources for your project, like a Notion, but like a custom Notion that also has this crypto wallet built in.
nice.
Yeah, so that is kind of the foundation of it, and the Babcoin part of it is, Gloria will not be happy at the fact that I have generated all the private keys for everyone's Babcoin. So this is not a decentralized cryptocurrency, but it basically you get Babcoin as a reward for being active in the club. So it's kind of a status thing. They have some value. You can trade them in for like a retreat ticket or a Patagonia jacket, things like that.
Nice.
Yeah, and I have some questions in the chat. Kintaro, who's one of our newest members, is asking, are Babcoins still priced at $250?
No, they like don't exist. Like I think like a lot of the OGs have them. Yeah, you could maybe hit some of the people up and see if they would be willing to sell. Like I know I have number 1. I know Akash has number 10. Other than that, yeah, they're gonna be pretty hard to find. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I'm gonna have to get one before I graduate.
Yeah, they're quite collectible. Like I said, some of the SF Blockchain Week ones are a little bit more because we made some of the silver ones, but then we also made ones that were silver plated, so they were much cheaper to make. Because at the time it was like, I think it was like, around $18-19 spot price just for the silver. So because they were all silver, we made very few of the blockchain and Berkeley ones. Whereas the SF Blockchain Week ones were like $2-3 to make, so made quite a few.
Cool. And Gloria, I will submit a bid on that if you're willing to sell. And Victor Way has a question that I might even just answer. It's, how does one go about creating their own cryptocurrency, and what benefit does it have?
Yeah.
So there's many ways. Yeah, I mean, John, I'll definitely let you answer. The quick answer is that there's many ways to do it. The easiest way is to make your own ERC20 token on Ethereum. That's something you can Google. And that basically is just a smart contract that you deploy. That smart contract has the ERC20 interface implemented. And the benefit, if this were 2017, you could have an ICO and make tons of money and scam people. But nowadays, you really have to have a good value behind the coin. Like, why does the coin exist? An example that I think is pretty intuitive is like Filecoin. IPFS is a web native decentralized storage protocol. One of the biggest problems with IPFS is that there was no incentive for people to support the network and run the necessary compute power to like actually store things. Filecoin changed that by providing a tokenized value that gives incentive for people to keep the network running. Ethereum, the Ethereum token is to run the Ethereum blockchain. It's the reward you get for powering the blockchain. Same with Bitcoin. So you really have to think about like, why do you have the token? What purpose does it serve? I think that's the quote unquote benefit that it has. But John, I wonder what your take is on that.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it really well. I mean, I might just kind of like dig into, because I mean, you can go down the rabbit hole on this, right? Is like benefit or value, right? Like why is Ethereum worth money? Like, I think you can go back to like, you know, Bitcoin, right? It had that kind of Bitcoin pizza day where someone bought 2 medium pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoin. I think I want to say his name's Laszlo. I don't know. I might be completely wrong. I'm terrible with names. But like he talks about it quite a bit, and he's like happy about it because up until that moment, it was worthless. It was just this digital thing you could kind of pass around, and a lot of cool cryptographers and cypherpunks couldn't say that word, thought it was like really cool. But then all of a sudden it was like, hey, I can buy 2 medium pizzas with 10,000 Bitcoin, you know. And then all of a sudden it started to have a price, and that kind of remains the argument. And it's really interesting too when you start to dig into that in the traditional world. Like, why does fiat currency have a value? You know, and like it used to be pegged to something like gold, which is finite. But then you can even kind of abstract that to, hey, now you have something like SpaceX that they could technically start mining asteroids, which have quadrillions of dollars of precious metals. So at the kind of edge case of all of this, the only thing that's finite is that which we make finite ourselves. And so if you're trying to say that, hey, you know, like platinum or gold or diamonds or any of this is like truly finite, like it's not. It's plentiful. It's just kind of bounded only by our ability to kind of explore space and mine it. But yeah, anyway, might have went a little bit too in the clouds with that one, but I think it's kind of a cool thought experiment when you start talking about like scarcity and value and like utility, and like these are just really just deep concepts that people gloss over every day. You give somebody $1 for something and you don't even think about it. But if there's like hundreds of years of like history of different monetary policy and like shells and rye stones and like all these like all these things that have been currency and like value and transfer, and you know, now we're here, and I think we're kind of at this next transition, and now you're seeing kind of central bank digital currencies, which is really a bigger deal I think that people are making it, and that you can't really have kind of wars anymore. You can have these kind of proxy wars where people are like backing small regions, but you can't really have all these all-out world wars because of nuclear weapons. But what you can now is start to have these monetary wars. And I really do think that we're seeing a lot of that posturing with these central bank digital currencies, because the US has completely dominated finance for quite some time, like after Bretton Woods. But with the kind of nationalistic rising and people starting to say, hey, why is the dollar the reserve currency? Does it really need to do that? Does it truly benefit us? Especially a lot of developing countries that haven't really engaged in finance at all. It's going to be very interesting to see how it goes. So it's something that I'm watching pretty closely.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the word transition. I think that really captures how deep this space goes. And it's hard to explain to someone who doesn't believe in the utility of blockchains or even in Bitcoin, for example. It's hard to get someone to understand that this is coming. And this is really going to potentially change the entire backbone of the way that we live. So I'm really excited about that and the way that things are going to change in the future. And I want to be a part of it. That for me is why I joined the space and even joined this club in the first place.
Yep.
Cool. So one follow-up on the question that spurred this conversation is, what's the difference between a coin and a token? Oh, nothing. They're just pseudonyms.
Well, I'm just kidding. I mean,
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
It's kind of funny. Like, they're used super interchangeably, but I try to basically say that like a coin is anything that like incentivizes like layer one, whereas a token is anything that's built on top of that. But that's just like my weird kind of like thing that, yeah. But you're exactly right. They're interchangeable. It doesn't matter. Like people use them both the same.
Yeah, I've actually never heard that, but that's like a pretty useful way to distinguish those two types of tokens. Or yeah. So okay.
So it's all nuanced. It doesn't matter, but there's so much jargon in the space. It
really is, and I feel like the jargon changes like every day.
It's crazy. Yeah.
So before we get into how you founded Decrypt Capital, there's one last question on NFTs. I know you mentioned that they were kind of popping back up a bit. Any more thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, NFTs are really interesting, and I think it's not for the reason why the people kind of think, you know, like you look at like OpenSea and like all these kind of tradable like art pieces, and like there's like, oh, there's like joke now, you know, that people are like, oh, I like hacked like this thing, I like screenshotted it, now I own it, blah blah blah, you know. It's like okay, like, you know, digital art and kind of like owning it and having that ownership is kind of interesting, but the thing that really kind of like lit my imagination on fire was the notion of kind of tokenizing insurance policies. Because you need these people non-fungible. There are specific contracts that are actually kind of, you know, denote some kind of insurance or some kind of coverage. And like, it's something that needs to be in a non-fungible token form. And there's something that you can kind of use temporarily while you have that risk, but then aren't really useful. But if you can trade them on a secondary market for someone who is mining it, it can also continue to have value. And so you're seeing kind of like Insure from like You're in Finance, you know, Nexus Mutual is kind of doing like this like merge mining with Keep Network, which take a brief aside to say that Keep Network, I think, is like one of the coolest projects in the space right now. So if you haven't checked it out, it's pretty cool. It's basically a way of kind of like interacting with data using multi-party computation without revealing any of that information. So anyway, won't go down that rabbit hole, but they basically are incentivizing people to stake their Nexus Mutual to, if anything bad happens on that platform, it will cover those losses. So just this kind of notion of having tokenized insurance policies that are for specific use cases and having a secondary market for that, I think that is very, very interesting. So that's why I'm kind of really looking at NFTs and seeing what else is specific enough that can be kind of applied to that. As opposed to, you know, art is always going to be interesting. I think that that's kind of valuable. Like there's always going to be things that are, a lot of people talk about it for like gaming. There's a lot of gaming companies that want to have kind of like items that are interoperable, but you know, we were kind of talking about gaming earlier. I think balancing these things and any items that actually have like utility and function in the game, if you can swap them, is like really hard to balance. And I don't think game designers want that moat to kind of leave. So that kind of leaves things that are like, oh, they make you look better. It's like more appearance, which obviously if you look at skins, that's a huge market. So it can make sense. But yeah, anyway, that just doesn't pique my interest quite as much as some of the tokenized insurance. I think tokenized insurance is really, really interesting.
That's a really good point. Yeah. And for the audience who don't know what NFTs are, they are called non-fungible tokens. So they're tokens with the idea that you don't spend them like money. Cool. So I think one thing I want to talk about that I personally am really excited about is conferences. When the space started to get a more mainstream, I guess, conferences started popping up and these events started popping up. What was the vibe when this started happening at these conferences, and how did that lead you to start SFBW?
Yeah, so I mean, kind of the path that it took was Ronan was talking to quite a few of the professors, and they were saying that, and I believe it was Byron who he helped do some of the Stanford conferences, Byron Gibson. He was saying that, you know, hey, it'd be really cool if there was a crypto economic security conference. Because there's already kind of the Stanford conference, but it doesn't cover crypto economic security, and that doesn't really exist. And so he was saying, hey, it'd be cool if kind of Berkeley was able to do that. And so Ronan decided to do it. Like, he's like, yeah, I'm just going to like host this, you know, like 300-400 person conference. How hard could it be? Right. Like we had the SEC speak at a conference that was like 100-person one. And that went really well. And that actually like made us quite popular. And then like we ended up having kind of like a lot of like people attend our courses. And so, you know, Ronan was like, how much harder would it be to do a 400-person, you know, 2-day conference, right? You know, like it's, you know, linear and difficulty, right? Yeah, completely wrong. Like he worked so hard on that conference. It was insane. Like I helped a little bit, but I mean, he just like carried that. And it ended up going really well. Like people thought it was awesome because, to your point, most conferences at that time were just atrocious. Like it was so scammy. There were so many projects with like more money than sense. Like they were just basically throwing capital to get on stage to show people to then raise money. And it was like this like cycle of like shilling that nobody wanted to go to. And it was like, from a fun perspective, you kind of have to go there to look for projects and like look for maybe prospective investors, like kind of do that. But it got to the point where it just wasn't even worth traveling because I was literally, you could go to every different country and see the same exact like 200 people that we were talking to. And it was like, why are we even doing this? And so that was why at CESC, we were like, hey, there was a really kind of like cult status interest in this, that people are like, wow, this is like bleeding edge research that ended up turning into some very successful projects. Like this is where Oasis first started, like presenting some of their material. Like Silvio Macaulay, like he ended up presenting some of his material before he ended up launching Algorand. So like seeing some of this early research before was interesting. And it was actually a great source of alpha for funds and people who were actually technically engaged and wanted to learn and not just throw money around and like scam people, right? So we were saying that like, okay, if this theme is popular, how about we just broaden it? Like, why don't we make a conference that we would want to attend? It's not going to be show fest. We're not going to allow scam projects. Like we're only going to have like good quality speakers. It's going to be like quality over quantity. And so that was kind of like the first San Francisco blockchain week. We're like, all right, we're going to do, I want to say it was like 4 days with like CESC being like one of the days. And then there's like 3 more days and going to have like 4 different stages, like all running simultaneously. We had like 200 speakers. Like,
Wow.
It was, I don't know, probably the craziest thing that we've ever done. Like, because the costs to do events in San Francisco are just absolutely absurd. And so it was like I always tell people like the one line item just for coffee was like over 6 figures. Like, because they charge you $10 for a 6-ounce cup of coffee. And it's all union. So you have to use all union food. You have to use all union labor, like blah, blah, blah. So it's like, you can't cut costs anywhere here. So it was very stressful because we had to front basically all of that. Hopefully the sponsors came. Like it ended up working out. It was like pretty successful. And then, we've done it the last couple of years. And then I was going to say the next year, basically there was a power outage at Berkeley. So we were going to host CESC there, but then we had to change 24 hours before the event. We had to completely change venues. And then this last year was COVID. So we ended up completely transitioning online and doing Unitize. And so, yeah, I would just say in general, like we aren't trying to do it to kind of make money. Like if you want to make money, don't do a conference. Like it just takes years off of your life and like you don't make that much. But like, I think for us, it was more so like providing that value to the community and like having something where it's like, there can still be kind of like quality projects and quality people who can come and network. And then also have the side benefit of we can represent a lot of our portfolio companies and companies we've invested in and kind of give them stage time where they don't have to pay $200,000-$300,000 like a consensus just to kind of get on stage. So yeah, it's been a huge learning experience, but it's a good way to get to know people, but it's definitely a lot of moving parts. I don't recommend kind of just spur of the moment trying to get into 100,000 person events. It's quite a steep learning.
Yeah, but that conference really has been amazing, even for me as a new person in the space a couple of years ago, just to see all the action and the big players and kind of get talked at with things that went over my head. It was really nice. And yeah, being part of that is really cool. So speaking of kind of the conference scene now, and you touched on this earlier, but like, could you compare the motivations of people now in the crypto blockchain space versus people back then in the early days?
Yeah. I think it depends on what time period, right? Like, I think we kind of need to like bifurcate that a little bit. Like, back in the like early days, like 2014, 15, like these were just like people drinking beer, eating pizza, and like super passionate about the space. Like I loved it. Like people there for all the right reasons. Like it was a very small group. You start getting into like 2017, 18, and it was just mania, like there was just more crypto events than there were days of the year, like every country was having like a meeting kind of, like a conference, like every day. It was ridiculous. There was just like so much capital flooding in, like everybody was like, this is the future. Obviously you've seen that kind of unwinding for the last 2 years, just a lot of like bad investments, kind of bad actors, kind of people who, weren't necessarily, I mean, with any mania and interest in kind of something that's new and revolutionary, you're going to have excess capital. And there's always going to be actors who are willing to take that excess capital in bad faith, which is unfortunate, but it's kind of the way things are. I think we had in kind of this crypto winter in the last 2 years, the people who have maintained and continued to build, I think it's not a perfect parallel, but kind of like that .com kind of like burst where you have the Amazons, right? They kind of lost significant, majority of their value, but then they refined, they continued their business model, and now they're phenomenal companies. Because if you can continue in some of the most adversarial environments and continue to build and adapt and overcome and refine your business model to survive, I think you're going to see some really strong players come about that. And so I think that's kind of where we are. But then now you have this new DeFi mania, and it's kind of crazy. Like, it's very, very reminiscent of like 2017, 18. Like, I'm getting all these deals where people are like, hey, we just like wrote this white paper last month. We're already 90% full. Like, let us know if you want to invest. But then it's even worse because it used to be, hey, we'll give you all these tokens, and it was like a clear scam. But then now they're like, oh, it's like linearly vesting over 2 years, and but then the team tokens are like unlocked. And so, I mean, it's very, very similar. Like everybody was like, hey, DeFi is the future. Like, we're gonna make a ton of money. But it's people don't change. It just kind of, you have to have these interim periods where people have these kind of cool down periods. And I think that seeing how much capital was ready to get placed and how much excitement there was after kind of Wi-Fi got launched and a lot of this DeFi stuff started to take off, I think that it's going to be pretty crazy the next bull cycle. Like, I think we're still in this accumulation period where we're still waiting. And I don't think we've even begun to kind of see like the speculative mania that's going to be in this next bubble.
Wow. So not financial advice. Watch the markets, folks.
Yeah. No financial advice on this, unfortunately. Yeah. Oh man.
Well, so I was gonna ask about the future of blockchain. That's too vague of a question for my liking, but I think someone in the chat has asked specifically, what are drawbacks from people building on blockchains? And if this technology is to persist, what are the main roadblocks that we have to cross for mass adoption?
Yeah. I think it's kind of this chicken and egg problem, because like you need it to be like a lot better user experience. But like I said, you have to make some concessions for user experience to kind of get that trustlessness and get that kind of security. So I think like one, like just having like really good wallets. I think two, just having like some of those that like make it very easy to connect. Like you're already seeing some of these DeFi products are like almost too easy. You just connect your MetaMask and you like click. But like even that, like installing your MetaMask or like having any significant amount of money in MetaMask, like, okay, like if I have more than this amount, then you should have a ledger, which I have to like have a hardware wallet that then I connect and then I use that to authorize my MetaMask, and so it's like, if you think like every button click, you're losing like a quartile of users. Crypto has tons, like dozens and dozens of clicks, especially for some of these things. So I think that we're in this space where if you're really intelligent and really engaged, there's tons of money to be made just because you're willing to be on that bleeding edge and you're willing to go through that where it was challenging. Like that's kind of how early Bitcoin was. No one knew about it. And so if you bought it and jumped through all these hurdles and like went on local Bitcoins, you can make a lot of money. And now it's easier to buy that. But now some of this DeFi is a little bit challenging. So I would say user experience is number one. I think scalability and privacy is definitely a close second and third, but I think that those are well on their way to being solved. Just because if you look at like the baseline initiative, not a lot of people are talking about it, but it has like Microsoft backing it, and like Ernst & Young has like put a ton of different money. It used to be Nightfall, which EY incubated, and now they partnered with Microsoft and a few other large Fortune companies. And they're basically trying to make these base smart contracts that help with scalability as well as privacy. And it's crazy because 2 years ago, you would have never seen somebody like EY saying, hey, we're going to build products for public permissionless, like for Ethereum. They would say, hey, we'll build you your own blockchain and charge you by the hour. Now they're saying, hey, we're going to have these like template smart contracts. So you don't have to audit them. You don't have to build them internally. You just copy, paste, run it. If you want anything complex, of course, you're going to hire our EY. They're still going to make money on the kind of nuanced, implementations. But it's this huge pivot point, which I think people aren't realizing like how significant that is. Because, you mentioned sharding and ETH 2.0 and like these ZK rollups. And like, if you can get that reasonable privacy and scalability, it's going to be massive, the different use cases that can be put on these chains.
I completely agree. And the fact that EY has been willing to sacrifice a cut of their potential profits to actually work on Ethereum and have their contracts be public, I think is what's going to make them win in the end, across all these other firms.
100%.
Um, so that's really resonating. I have another question in the chat. Then we'll kind of jump into just wrap it up with like some talk about current projects. But this question is about stablecoins. So if cryptocurrency is backed by the dollar, does it defeat the whole purpose? Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of an interesting question because it's like you kind of have this, hey, like let's have this kind of like decentralized autonomous currency that, you know, is not controlled by anybody, you know, let's have like be Bitcoin, right? But if you go on the exchange or you go on Blockfolio or you go on CoinMarketCap, like all of the coins that you're holding are denominated in dollars. You know, like I think that like the end goal is to say that like, oh, like, you know, like 1 Bitcoin is worth 1 Bitcoin, right? Like I think that's like well, a lot of the maxis say, right? You know, 1 ETH is worth 1 ETH, you know, where we're going, it doesn't matter what the dollars kind of mean, right? I think that we're not quite there yet though. And I think that something that's super compelling to people who don't necessarily understand the value prop or are a little concerned or wary about kind of open source code or kind of Bitcoin or Ethereum, it's a lot easier for you to say that, hey, instead of having to buy a $700 point of sale terminal, accept Visa, pay a 3 to 5% fee, how about you can just download an app, you can have somebody scan a QR code, they can send you fiat, and then we can have that easy kind of intermediary of exchange. Because that was one of the biggest problems for a lot of corporate clients is, one, they were worried about, okay, like this is something entirely new to me, but I sell something for 2 ETH and then all of a sudden it goes down 50%. Like my OpEx cannot flex that much, you know, like I'm running a company, I can't have a 30, 40% reduction, you know, kind of, they're not in the business of gambling with their profits. You know, you want to have like these known risks. So I think like in that regard, they're pretty beneficial. And I would say just really kind of a quick segue, like I don't think a lot of people realize kind of where some of this started actually was with Bitfinex. So Bitfinex kind of poked the bear with Wells Fargo because they were holding up some of their international wires. And so they sued them. And Wells Fargo said, okay, cool, while we're handling this, we're just going to freeze all wires because we're connected to every intermediary bank and you're just not going to allow any fiat in or out. And so you actually had a 30% premium for like a long time because people were buying Bitcoin just to get out of the exchange because they're like, Bitfinex is going to die. And then that was when Tether came about. And they said, hey, let's have this token that's backed by a dollar, well, backed, which you know, we can go into kind of like all of the different things that have went back and forth between, you know, is it fully backed or not? But I think that it's something that's valuable as a means of exchanging, like because you need that kind of fiat kind of denomination for a lot of these decentralized kind of exchange pairings. I think people still do think about dollars. I still think that people still see that as a safe haven, that having something that's like stable, that they don't want to be speculative or kind of like go up or down so a lot. So I think it served its space, like a role, but I think like where we're hopefully going, we're going to get away from more of that dependency. And you're going to have more kind of crypto native, but it's just kind of where we're at currently, and it, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of like today, what are some projects to wrap things up that you think that our audience should look into that you think are interesting and promising?
Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of discussed like ZK Rollup. And I think far and away, the best project right now is Matter Labs. So if you check out like ZK Sync and what they're building, like it's just absolutely phenomenal. They did a couple of the GitHub, the Gitcoin grants because it's just very expensive to do a bunch of Gitcoin grants, but they're batching all of them so you can kind of do it in one transaction. So they're doing a great job. I think, like I mentioned, Keep Network, they just recently launched. I think that that's really interesting just because the kind of like double-edged sword with blockchain is that if you have data that you interact with on chain, that it's there forever and anyone can see it. But what if I want to have a private key and store it? How do I do that? You can use this kind of a primitive like known as a keep, and then using multi-party computation, you can have 5 different parties hold pieces of that, and they can actually like sign a transaction for you. And so what they've done with that kind of primitive that they made is they made a trustless bridge between Bitcoin and Ethereum, and it's called TBTC. So you can actually bring your Bitcoin onto Ethereum, And then I think you're going to start to see like a lot of yield farming using Bitcoin. And it's just a massive amount of liquidity sitting there. So I think kind of you have like wrapped BTC and a couple of other like ones that you have to jump through some KYC hoops, and, you know, it's just not fully trustless. And you have to usually go through like CoinList or go through like another kind of like intermediary and trust them to hold your coins. Whereas TBTC is completely trust minimized. So Keep Network, I think, is doing a phenomenal job. Just their Discord's crazy. They have a great community. So really bullish on that. I mean, from the Berkeley standpoint, like Oasis is launching soon. So there, I think if you look at a lot of layer one, people are saying, hey, let's do like more and more kind of, you know, higher scalability. But it's kind of interesting that people are willing to pay, you know, $100 per transaction on Ethereum, even though you can pay cents on maybe another layer one. So then it seems to me that maybe that there's some stickiness or something interesting, and it's not simply about transaction fees. That's a different conversation, but I think like Oasis does have a moat in that there's a lot of enterprise companies who need kind of that robust privacy assurances at that base layer. Ethereum is making huge leaps and bounds for privacy, but I think because of a lot of legislation and kind of concern about regulatory or like regulators, it's not primary for them to make that layer one. They're trying to make it layer two. But the problem with having layer two privacy on something that's not private all layer one is you can still extract a ton from the metadata, and you can like still find out a lot of that stuff. Whereas Oasis has kind of robust privacy on layer one. So I think as far as like interacting with different medical data, any kind of like, you know, like PII or like kind of information you want to keep private, they're going to do a pretty phenomenal job. And I think they're going to have a lot of enterprise engagement. So definitely check that one out. Yeah, just a bunch of ones like Bolt Labs. Bolt Labs is doing some great work on helping to make kind of like the Lightning Network even more private. People think Lightning Network is like quite private. It uses onion routing, it's quite private, but if you have these kind of short, consistent hops, you can actually find a lot of different data from that. So they're making kind of like a fully private, you know, zero knowledge by definition Lightning Network. Yeah, I mean a bunch. There's just like so much going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I think that you named a couple projects in really good industries, like the layer two stuff, layer one privacy. I mean, if these are problems that have been trying to be solved for so long, and the moment that one of these projects can crack the code, that's amazing. I mean a lot.
Yeah, and that's where I think we like really are, is like it, you know, I think like 2019 was kind of the year for building. And now I think 2020 is the year of kind of launching. And then I think you're going to see a kind of continuation of that in 2021 is all of this kind of connecting together. And you have all of these kind of primitives, and you have this like DeFi where people are just kind of like reinstantiating traditional finance primitives on a decentralized way. But now it's like, you can look at something like flash loans, which is like an entirely new primitive, right?
Yeah.
And you can do so many more interesting things with that. And that's what I'm interested in, is the intersection of things that exist already, but piecing that together in a way that's significant. And I mean, if you think about Bitcoin, that's all Bitcoin was. Satoshi didn't invent really anything. He took prior work and put it together in an ingenious way. And I think that's what we're seeing, is like that kind of composability and extensibility on Ethereum is why everyone's so excited. Because, you know, someone like, you know, Andre from Yearn Finance creates this kind of aggregator, and then all of a sudden, like everyone goes crazy, and like governance and, you know, like all these different like DeFi. So it's just cool to see how like one person contributing a couple lines of code or hundreds of lines of code can start this kind of like, you know, Cambrian explosion of development. So yeah, it's just, yeah, a great space. I love it.
Absolutely. And I think our audience learned a lot as well. And I hope they're inspired to get and dive deeper into the space too. So it's been really great to have you, John. And it's been great to talk about the history of Bitcoin and your impressions of the space. Any parting thoughts for our audience today?
Yeah, I mean, I think just in general, like, I'm glad that everyone's here. Like, obviously, if you're here, you have some interest. I think that just find something that you're passionate about. I think that there's just so many communities and so many niches like in blockchain that there's so many ways to get involved. A lot of people will say, you know, oh, I'm not technical enough, or, you know, oh, this isn't, you know, like, this isn't technical enough for me, or like, there's a lot of different material out there, and there's a lot of different communities out there who are willing to kind of help you understand. I think blockchain at Berkeley being like one of them, obviously, huge shout out. But yeah, I think just really appreciate everyone's like engagement and just always stay curious. I know that sometimes it can feel like kind of a fire hose of information. There's a lot to know, but just know that that's probably how 99.999% of people feel. Like, you know, I do this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years, you know, for quite a while now. And I feel like every day I realize I don't know anything. So just, yeah, continue learning, continue engaging, find a community. I think that like a lot of these kind of discords and a lot of these kind of like chat groups are where like I found the most kind of benefit. There's a lot of Telegram groups as well. So yeah, just keep reading, keep learning, stay interested, stay curious.
Awesome. And tune in on Thursday at 6 p.m. PST for the next installment of our Fundamentals webinar series. That's a great way to continue that learning and really dive deep so you can start to explore this stuff and buy DeFi, Yearn, lean tokens, and all that stuff as well.
Yeah, I'll start a trading group. Love it.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I was gonna say thanks so much for having me, and yeah, appreciate everyone else for attending. It was absolutely great being here, and yeah, congratulations on all the hard work of blockchain at Berkeley and carrying it on and doing a phenomenal job.
Thank you.
Cool.